It began with a flicker in the dark, a transmission so weak that most long-range scanners ignored it, thinking it was just static from some dying satellite or an echo from a collapsed star. But somewhere on a distant observation post orbiting the twin moons of Valthera, a bored technician picked up the feed, adjusted the frequency, and suddenly found himself staring at something that froze the blood in his veins. Live broadcast from an unknown world, showing fire, destruction, and humans fighting a war that no one had expected to ever happen. The broadcast didn't have words. There was no intro, no narrator, no explanation, just the sound of distant thunder, buildings collapsing, and men and women running through smoke with weapons in their hands and fury in their eyes. Their uniforms torn, their faces covered in blood and dirt, yet their movements calm, focused, and terrifyingly efficient. The technician sent the signal to his supervisor, who sent it to Central Command, and within 3 hours, more than 7 alien governments had their eyes on the feed, curious at first, confused by the planet's primitive tech and lack of identification, until someone from the Uran Data Council shouted one word that echoed across the observation deck and made everyone sit up straight. Earth. The moment the name was spoken, a silent wave of realization passed through those watching, because Earth had sent messages to the stars before, had begged for allies, pleaded for help when the threat first came, but no one had answered, no one had cared, and now, here it was broadcasting its final stand for everyone to see. The signal wasn't coming from a military base or satellite, it was coming from hundreds of devices, spread across the planet, bouncing from abandoned towers. 2 damaged orbital relays, patched together by desperate hands who wanted only one thing, to make sure the galaxies saw what happened next, and what they saw changed everything. A city in flames, giant alien war machines, stomping through broken streets, human fighters using nothing but outdated rifles, makeshift explosives, and strategy that looked almost suicidal until it worked. A group of human soldiers, outnumbered and cornered, lured a heavy walker into a tunnel rigged with pressure mines, then collapsed the entire structure with themselves still inside, sacrificing their lives to destroy the enemy's advance. The galaxy watched in silence. No one cheered, no one blinked, because something in the way these humans fought, something raw, angry, and unshakable, made even the war-born species of the outer systems lean forward and whisper the same question again and again. Why didn't we help them? The broadcast cut to a new location, an old school turned into a command post. Children sat quietly, handing ammunition to tired soldiers. A nurse with a missing arm tied a tourniquet using her teeth. An old man in a wheelchair hacked into an enemy drone and sent it crashing into its own fleet. This wasn't just war. This was survival. This was humanity refusing to die quietly. And somewhere, across the stars, in a council chamber where the powerful met to discuss trade routes and military alliances, one ambassador slowly stood, watching the screen, and whispered something that had not been said in thousands of years. We made a mistake, but it was too late. The war was already deep, and the humans, those strange, emotional, fragile beings the galaxy had ignored, were showing something that frightened even the oldest empires. They didn't beg, they didn't ask for pity, they fought, like they knew the end was coming, and they were determined to drag their enemies with them into the dark. The feed zoomed in on a single soldier, his armor cracked, his helmet missing, his chest bleeding, but still he walked forward, holding a flag that had been burned and torn, planting it into the rubble of a fallen building, while enemy fire rained down around him. He didn't flinch, he just looked at the sky, at us, at whoever was watching, and then the screen went black. For 10 full seconds. There was nothing, no sound, no signal, no words. And then, just before the feed vanished completely, a voice came through low. Human.com. This is not for rescue. This is not for mercy. This is so you remember, all of you. Remember what happens when you leave us to die. The signal ended, but the silence that followed spread faster than the transmission itself. Entire civilizations stopped their broadcasts. Some turned off their own war channels, and others, quietly, without announcing it, began erasing old files, where they had ignored Earth's call for help, because they now knew what was coming, and they were afraid. Long before the war began, before the first enemy ship entered Earth's orbit, and before the broadcast made the stars go silent, there had been a time when humanity was still reaching out, still hoping, still believing that the galaxy would hear their voice, that someone, anyone, would answer their call, not because Earth was strong, but because it was alone. The first signal was sent after the early warning satellites picked up a strange movement beyond Jupiter, unfamiliar shapes, unnatural paths, and energy readings that didn't belong to comets or mining ships or peaceful travelers. It was something else, something cold, something silent, something coming straight toward Earth, with no communication, no explanation, and no reason to slow down. The United Earth Assembly didn't panic at first. Instead, they activated the oldest protocol in human space, Low Galactic Contact Requester. Simple message, broadcasted on every frequency, translated into more than 70 known alien languages, politely asking for assistance, for information, for advice, or for any sign that someone out there was listening. No one replied. The signal kept repeating, every 12 hours, and still silence. In hidden chambers of distant worlds, alien leaders received the message. They read it, they understood it, and they turned it off. Some laughed, saying humans always exaggerated threats and loved drama. Others feared getting involved, worried that helping a primitive species might ruin their neutral stance with the stronger empires, and a few didn't care at all, considering Earth just another backwater planet, too far from their trade routes to matter. Even the Council of Interstellar Powers, the ones sworn to protect younger civilizations, dismissed the alert, claiming that Earth had not contributed enough to galactic unity to earn support. So the message was buried, and Earth was left to face the coming storm alone. When the enemy arrived, cloaked in shadows and wrapped in silence, they didn't give warnings, they didn't ask for surrender, and they didn't declare war. They simply began dismantling Earth's defenses, one orbital station at a time, without even speaking. Humanity had prepared for war with itself for centuries, but nothing could prepare them for what came from the dark. Still, even in their desperation, Earth tried again. They changed the signal. No longer a request now, a plea. They sent images of the destruction, voice recordings of commanders dying mid-message, and satellite footage of cities being turned to ash. They didn't ask for weapons. They didn't ask for soldiers. They just asked to be seen. And the galaxy did. See, billions of beings watched as Earth burned, but not through official channels. They watched through pirate feeds, stolen relays, and hidden receivers, as if what was happening on Earth was a form of entertainment. Another violent world tearing itself apart for everyone's amusement. Some alien citizens felt sorry, some wept, but no government acted. No fleet launched, no alliance formed, because Earth, in their eyes, was a species known for war, and many believed they deserved what was happening. Even those who considered helping hesitated too long, and the window closed. The war changed. Humans stopped sending messages, stopped asking for help, and started sending warnings. One by one, the broadcast shifted from pleas to silence, and then to battle footage. And that's when the galaxy began to worry, because what was once a crying child had become a silent soldier, and every transmission now carried not desperation, but vengeance. A famous alien reporter once said during a broadcast, "We should have helped them when they asked. Now, they're teaching us why we should have listened." But by then, it was too late. Earth had learned the truth, that the galaxy only responds to power, and so they began building their own. Not ships, not fleets, but people. People who had lost homes, families, friends. People who no longer believed in mercy. People who had buried the idea of peace deep beneath the ruins of their cities. And the world changed. Across Earth's broken surface, new leaders rose, not politicians, but survivors, commanders forged in fire, engineers who rebuilt weapons out of fallen drones, hackers who turned enemy systems into traps, and medics who fought with one hand while saving lives with the other. This was no longer about asking for help. This was about making sure that galaxy never forgot what they had ignored. And when the enemy ships finally started falling from the sky, not because of alien help, but because of human retaliation, the galaxy stopped watching for fun. They watched in fear, because they had seen Earth's last call for help, and they had turned away. Now, they watched Earth answer its own call with fire, with fury, and with a message etched into the side of a downed enemy cruiser, placed there by human survivors using molten steel. You had your chance. By the third week of the invasion, the skies above Earth were no longer blue, they were filled with black smoke. broken satellites, burning debris, and the glowing wreckage of enemy ships that had once moved like gods, but now fell like dying beasts into oceans, deserts, forests, and mountains, because humanity, though battered and bloodied, had finally stopped retreating and started fighting back with everything it had left. There were no more world leaders giving speeches, no more conferences, no more politics, no more waiting for help. The planet had changed. The cities were now bunkers, the people were now soldiers, and the children no longer played. They learned to aim. That the war wasn't fair. It wasn't organized, but it was human. In the ruins of old New York, a group of firefighters untrained in war but trained in saving lives turned their broken trucks into armored weapons, ramming enemy patrols and dragging survivors out of collapsed buildings, while smoke and gunfire lit up the sky. In the mountains of Pakistan, shepherds used satellite parts and hunting rifles to create sniper nests so deadly that enemy officers began refusing to patrol those regions, calling it cursed ground. In the underground tunnels beneath Berlin, hackers took control of an enemy drone swarm using nothing but salvaged tech, old solar batteries and homemade code, then used those drones to strike the enemy's own command base from behind. Every day, more humans died, but every day, more humans learned. They adapted, they endured, and they got better. The enemy, so confident in the beginning, had expected fear. They had expected collapse. They had expected a species that begged for mercy. But instead, they found a species that refused to stay down. They hit Earth hard, but Earth hit back with fire and fury. Every enemy victory became more costly. Every step forward meant leaving behind their own broken, and every destroyed human city became a trap that swallowed entire squads in silence. In one recorded transmission, accidentally intercepted by an alien merchant ship, a Zarkari officer was heard screaming over a comlink, "They don't fight like other species. They wait, they bleed, they burn, but they never stop. We kill 10, and 100 take their place." That audio spread across the galaxy within hours. What had started as a war now felt like a legend being written in real time. The enemy command structure began to break apart. Some leaders suggested retreat, others demanded total annihilation. But no one could agree, because Earth was no longer a battlefield. It had become a test, and every soldier who touched its soil had to answer one simple question: how much pain can you take before you break? The humans already knew the answer. They had lived it for centuries. They had survived cold, heat, disease, war, famine, loss, and betrayal. They didn't fight because they thought they would win. They fought because there was no other option. One of the most viral clips in the entire war broadcast showed a young girl, maybe 12 years old, dragging her injured brother across a destroyed bridge while enemy fire rained down. Her face covered in ash and blood, her voice whispering to him, "Keep your eyes open. They don't get to win." She didn't cry, she didn't stop, she just kept going. That clip was shown across hundreds of alien networks before being banned by multiple governments who said it was too disturbing. But it was too late. The image had already burned itself into history. Earth wasn't the victim anymore. It was the storm. From the jungles of Brazil to the ice fields of Siberia, humans rose with fury. Old grudges were forgotten. Borders disappeared. Religions, languages, and politics fell away like dust. Because now, there was only one identity: human. The enemy had come to conquer, but they had awakened something far worse than defiance. They had awakened a species that did not know how to give up, that saw every loss as a reason to fight harder, that buried its dead and then turned the graves into battlegrounds. And the galaxy, still watching the war like a nightmare that wouldn't end, began to understand something they had never believed before. Humanity doesn't need allies to become dangerous. They only need a reason, and now they had one. The final seconds of this broadcasted segment showed a massive human-built cannon, made from scavenged ship parts and powered by 6 old nuclear cores, firing straight into the heart of an enemy cruiser in low orbit. And as the alien ship exploded into 1,000 pieces above the Earth, one word flashed across the screen, painted in blood and fire: remember. By the 4th month of the war, Earth was no longer the same planet the galaxy had once ignored. Because where once there had been cities and laws and order, now there were fire lines, ruins, bunkers, and soldiers in every street, in every shadow, and in every heartbeat. And yet, even as humanity bled, They were not losing, they were evolving. The enemy had brought machines called perfect, efficient, but humans had brought something else, something worse, something that came not from science or planning, but from pain, fury, and desperations, something they hadn't told the galaxy about, something they had hidden even from themselves, until the moment came when all hope was almost lost. It was called Project Revenant, and it began not in a lab or a base but in a broken hospital, where a man named Dr. Elias Marin stood over the body of his only daughter, killed by the first orbital strike, her DNA burned into ash, her voice stored only in the last messages she had left him, and something inside him had with grief, but with purpose. Dr. Marin had been a neural scientist, one of the quiet ones, one of the thinkers, not a warrior, not a hero, just a man who had spent his life building a way to help damaged human minds heal faster, by merging brain signals with artificial intelligence. But in the ruins, surrounded by fire, he rewrote his work. He deleted every safety. He tore out every ethical lock. He used his own brain as the first test subject, and what came out was not a man anymore. It was the first Revenant, part human, part code, part memory, all vengeance. The Revenant was not controlled. It chose its targets. It sensed pain across the battlefield, and it moved like smoke, like a ghost, like a living weapon wrapped in broken armor and old sorrow. It didn't use commands, it reacted to thoughts, to trauma, to the sound of screams. And when it entered the battlefield for the first time, the enemy lost an entire battalion. In 47 seconds, the footage was captured live. At first, the alien generals laughed. They called it a glitch, a trick, some drone wrapped in red light. But the second time the Revenant appeared inside an enemy mothership, there was no laughter, only static, followed by one final message sent in a human voice, calm and cold. You are not fighting humans anymore. You are fighting what you made us become. Across Earth, more Revenants were born, not mass-produced, not cloned. Each one was different. Each one was personal. Each one was voluntary, because to become one meant giving up your body, your memories, your life. It meant turning your grief into fire. And only those who had lost everything were willing to pay the price. Mothers who watched their families burn, fathers who buried their children, soldiers with no comrades left. They became something else. They became monsters for Earth. One of them, known only as Vera, walked through a wall of enemy fire without armor, her skin glowing with plasma, her eyes black with data, and her hands wrapped in the energy of 12 reactors wired into her spine. She didn't speak, she didn't scream, she just moved, and where she walked, the enemy died. Even the invaders, cold, logical, emotionless, began recording her movements and placing warnings in their command maps. Do not engage, run, because the Revenants didn't want surrender. They wanted memory. They wanted every invader to remember the face of the world. They tried to destroy, and the galaxy was watching. Every transmission showed their presence, their eyes, their silence, and slowly, fear spread. The Council of Outer Systems issued a blackout order: no more broadcasts, no more Earth signals, no more war footage. But it didn't work, because the broadcast wasn't being sent from satellites anymore. It was being carried through Revenants themselves. Each one transmitted live data directly into the Starnet, bouncing off old machines, broken relays, even stolen enemy tech. It couldn't be stopped, and more importantly, it couldn't be unseen. Children on other worlds began drawing Earth's flag in the dirt. Alien soldiers started dreaming of red eyes and human faces that never blinked. And the old phrase used by Earth's enemies, "They are only human," turned into a curse. No one dared to speak anymore. One alien historian said it best during an underground interview. They asked us for help. We refused. Now they've become something that doesn't need help, doesn't want peace, and doesn't care about our fear. They've become the very storm they begged us to prevent. And deep beneath the Earth's crust, in a command bunker built from the bones of a fallen city, the first Revenant, Dr. Elias Marin, stood alone, watching the stars, not with anger anymore, but with clarity. He whispered to no one, yet his words echoed into the broadcast. We didn't start this war, but now that you're watching, we'll finish it. The moment the Revenants rose, the war changed. But what made the galaxy truly panic wasn't just the fire on Earth or the power of the new human monsters. It was the fact that every second of it was still being broadcast, still spreading. still playing across screens, devices, and neural links in places that were never meant to see Earth's wrath, and no matter how hard they tried, no one could shut it off anymore because the broadcast had become alive. At first, the Council of Worlds tried blocking the signals through legal orders, sending messages to data providers, warning every network that the human war feeds were unstable, dangerous, and psychologically harmful. But before the orders could be fully enforced, something unexpected happened. People across the stars started sharing the broadcasts on their own, not for entertainment, not for politics, but because they felt something ancient rise in their hearts when they saw humans stand in fire and still refused to kneel. A farmer on the dry moon of Silura, who had never lifted a weapon in his life, watched a clip of a young human boy standing on a rooftop, holding a flare high into the sky to guide incoming survivors, even as enemy gunships circled above. And when the flare was finally shot down and the boy disappeared into the rubble, the farmer stood from his seat, turned to his family, and said, "I would have fought for him." That clip reached billions, and the broadcast grew. It no longer depended on human satellites or Earth's limited tech. Alien citizens hacked into their own systems to keep it alive. Pirate networks boosted it. Traders uploaded it to ship memory cores. And ancient archive bots, even those left behind in forgotten ruins, began rewriting their priority logs just to store and spread the data. The broadcast had become a memory loop, a living truth, a warning, and governments across the galaxy, especially those who had laughed when Earth first called for help, began to feel the weight of guilt turn into the sharper blade of fear. The enemy, those who had started the war, understood this better than anyone, because now, everywhere they went, even in systems far from Earth, they saw signs of the human message graffiti painted on docking bays, Earth's burned flag displayed on backalley holoscreens, and one phrase whispered in alien tongues by children who should never have known it. They remember. In one council world, a government official demanded all news about Earth be wiped from the galactic records. He was found the next day with his data vault overwritten, every screen showing human battle footage, over and over, with one sentence blinking at the bottom: "You don't get to forget." The broadcast had become a weapon more powerful than any revenant, any warship, or any fleet. It was truth on repeat, and every new clip added to it only made it worse for those who had stayed silent. One clip showed a blind human woman crawling through broken glass, carrying a child in her arms, humming softly so he wouldn't cry as alien mechs marched just meters away. Another clip showed a group of engineers using wrecked alien parts to build a railgun that fired once and knocked an enemy ship out of orbit. Another showed a human soldier bleeding out while laughing, saying, "Tell the stars we fought like giants." Each video reel, raw, unscripted, cut through every political lie, every news spin, every excuse made by those who had said Earth was too violent, too young, too unstable. Because now, Earth wasn't violent, it was righteous. It wasn't unstable, it was furious, and the galaxy could no longer look away. They tried shutting down the pirate feeds. They tried arresting those who shared the footage. They even tried building AI walls to block the signal. But it didn't matter, because the broadcast had already entered the ancient memory core buried beneath the oldest star station, passed through dead satellites left by extinct species, and merged with rogue data streams that drifted like ghosts through the cosmic web. It was everywhere, and worst of all, it wasn't asking for help anymore. It wasn't asking for anything. It wasn't asking for anything. Was showing, and what it showed was a species that should have died, but didn't. A planet that should have been wiped out, but stood. A people who should have surrendered, but chose to become something the stars would never forget. The final clip shown in this part of the stream sent a shiver across hundreds of worlds. A lone revenant stood on top of an enemy ship, its body glowing with cracked light. Half machine, half man, raising a human flag high into space, its voice echoing through the stars without sound. Translated through text burned across every display. It touched. "This is not a war. This is what you created when you left us behind." And for the first time since the war began, a strange thing happened across the stars. Silence, not from censorship, not from defeat, but from fear, because they knew now this broadcast couldn't be stopped, and Earth wasn't done yet. As the broadcasts continued, the galaxy, once so vibrant, began to grow quiet, not out of peace, not out of reconciliation, But because it was realizing something that could no longer be ignored, humanity had awakened, something it couldn't control. Before the war, the galaxy had always prided itself on being a place of order, a place where diplomacy, trade, and alliances kept the peace. Empires had risen and fallen, species had come and gone, but at the core of it all, there was always a rule that everyone understood. Survival meant submission. Humanity had never understood this rule. They never wanted to, and now, every single broadcast, every signal, every transmission from Earth, every human story was reminding the stars that the rules were different for Earth, and what humanity had been left with, after generations of war and struggle, was not a begging species, not a broken species, but a living warning. One by one, alien leaders, generals, and civilians who had laughed at Earth's first plea for help began to stay silent. When the broadcasts appeared on their screens, they didn't speak, they didn't act, they simply shut off their communication systems. The once vibrant voices of the galaxy began to fade into an eerie quiet, as if they were collectively holding their breath, waiting for something they couldn't quite understand but knew, deep in their bones, was coming. It wasn't just the governments that went silent, it was everyone. The markets in space stations that had once buzzed with chatter, trade, and gossip about human weakness grew still. The streets on colonies, once alive with the voices of traders, travelers, and tourists, were now empty except for the occasional whisper of a name, a phrase, a warning. Earth, the very word became something alien to them, something they feared to speak, because it was tied to something they could not control, could not predict. The broadcasts themselves grew darker. At first, it had been images of humans fighting, struggling, dying but never breaking. Then it had turned to the revenants, terrifying beings who could no longer be called human. But now, as the war reached its brutal peak, the broadcasts stopped showing battle footage and instead began to show something far worse: a quiet planet, humans walking through ruins, empty streets, silent fields, children staring into the sky, not in fear, but in defiance. The camera would linger on their faces, on their eyes, on the scars that marked their bodies not as victims, but as survivors. One of the most chilling clips showed an entire city, once a thriving hub, now reduced to rubble. The camera focused on a single piece of debris, an old human book, a soldier's medal, a wedding ring, buried beneath the dust. A voice, calm and devoid of emotion, spoke. "We are not lost. We are not forgotten. We remember." It was like a pulse running through the galaxy, and then came the moment that no one had been prepared for: the final message, sent from Earth's last working communications relay, shown not to one planet, but to the entire galaxy, to anyone who had ever listened to the broadcasts. It wasn't a plea, it wasn't a command, it was a statement. "We are not your mistake, we are your reckoning." No one spoke after that. It wasn't fear alone that made the galaxy so quiet. It wasn't the destruction on Earth. It wasn't the unstoppable force of the revenants. It was something far more unsettling. It was the knowledge that Earth was no longer a simple, primitive world. To be conquered it was a force that would no longer ask for mercy, a force that would not forgive, a force that would not forget. And as the final broadcasts faded to black, and the voices of alien civilizations finally gave way to an all-encompassing silence, a strange thing happened. The space stations, the trade routes, the outer rim colonies, they all felt it. Not just the weight of the broadcasts, but the weight of a memory that had been forced into the hearts of the galaxy's inhabitants. Because no one could look at the Earth broadcasts anymore and call humanity weak. No one could ignore the scars of a species that had been pushed to the edge, and then turned the edge into a blade. It was as if the galaxy, in its infinite expanse, had suddenly realized something, and that realization spread faster than light. Earth wasn't a star to be destroyed. It was a memory that would never fade, and somewhere, in the deep dark corners of the galaxy, where no one could hear, where no one could see, a whispered phrase began to drift across space: "We are not alone anymore." Long after the last enemy ship fell, long after the skies above Earth cleared of fire and smoke, and long after the broadcasts stopped echoing through the stars, something strange began to happen in the galaxy. Planets that once mocked Earth suddenly shut their borders. Powerful empires that once laughed at humans began reinforcing their defenses, and old alliances that had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years started crumbling quietly. Because even though the war was over, something more dangerous had taken its place. the silence before the storm. It began with the arrivals. No transmission, no introduction, no signal, just presence. On the edge of several alien systems, those who had ignored Earth's cries for help or used human suffering for entertainment, black ships appeared, silent and unmarked, massive in size, each one shaped like a dagger pointed straight. At the heart of the systems they hovered near. No weapons fired, no messages sent. They simply hovered, close enough to be seen from the surface, far enough to avoid aggression, but always there, always watching. One by one, those worlds panicked. In panic, many tried to communicate, offering apologies, peace, even tribute, but Earth didn't answer. It didn't even acknowledge their words, because Earth didn't come to talk. It came to remind them of the war they ignored, remind them of the cries they silenced, remind them of the children who died while the stars watched. On one trade planet, when a council demanded the human fleet explain its presence, the only reply they received was a small object dropped into their orbiter, scorched, dented helmet with the Earth insignia carved deep into the side, and a message written across the top. You watched us burn. No voice, no face, just memory and consequence. On another world, an enemy general, who had once ordered attacks on fleeing human ships, woke up to find every system in his mansion hacked, every display showing looping footage of his orders, his laughter, his speeches, and, finally, the moment one of those human ships exploded in space, taking hundreds of civilians with it. He was never seen again. Some say he fled into exile, others say the humans came for him quietly, in the dark, but no one asked, no one dared, because Earth had changed the rules. There were no more warnings, no more speeches, no more mercy. Now, when a black ship appeared in your system, it didn't mean war was coming, it meant war had already passed, and Earth was just checking to see if you remembered what side you were on. Across the galaxy, monuments were built not to heroes, but to regret. On some planets, statues were raised with heads bowed, not in pride, but in apology. In classrooms once filled with false histories, children now read about Earth's first war, not as fiction, not as a tragic footnote, but as a lesson written in blood. Because now, even the youngest species knew the truth. Earth doesn't forget. Earth doesn't beg. Earth doesn't send warnings. It sends consequences. And what made it worse was that Earth wasn't seeking revenge. It wasn't wiping out cities or demanding surrender. It didn't need to. Its silence was enough. Its memory was its weapon. Its fleet, patient, eternal, was its voice. And that voice echoed through the galaxy, not with sound, but with presence. A presence that reminded every starborn empire, every cold-hearted senate, and every proud ruler that once, when humanity stood alone, the galaxy turned its back, and now humanity walks with shadows, quiet, watching, remembering. In the deepest part of the broadcast archives, in a file that no one dares delete, sits the final message ever received from the human fleet before the silence returned. A calm voice, spoken by a woman with no name, no rank, no face, just fire in her words. We asked for help. You laughed. Now you asked for peace. We'll think about it. Since that day, the galaxy has learned to whisper Earth's name with respect, not because it fears war, but because it fears judgment, because Earth may not send armies anymore, but the memory of what it became, the fire, the rage, the revenant, the flag raised in Ashdol travels across the stars in silence, and silence is louder than any war cry, because silence means they are watching, and watching means they remember.